its dominance of the air. The power of its strategic bomber force was formidable against a small country without an effective air force. All of North Korea and the occupied South was at the mercy of the B-29s flying from island bases in the Pacific. The effects were devastating.
Almost every day they came and attacked some of the military installations and some of the places that they thought important for the war. And then later on, they started bombing the whole city.
The UN forces also had available to them growing backup from close air support. The Japanese islands were a secure base, an American sanctuary. Aircraft operated both from there and from carrier groups around the Korean coast, day and night, attacking supply lines, factories, towns, and villages. MacArthur had issued a list of targets which included every major town in Korea. Some American aircraft strayed further afield, attacking towns inside China. The air defenses for both the North's troops at the front and for supply lines and towns in the rear were very weak. The army at the front along the Naktong suffered heavy casualties under intense bombing, including napalm. Despite local support, its logistics were strained to breaking point. What remained of the Southern Army withdrew south towards Pusan. Its forces were still unable to check the North Koreans. It was short of recruits. All males of fighting age within the perimeter could expect to be drafted, even if only to be armed with wooden rifles and sent into battle often untrained. Southern casualties, both military and civilian, were very high in some of the bitter fighting that took place along the Naktong River. The North Koreans made a last push to break through.
The battles at the Naktong River were very fierce. The river was running very fast and deep because of heavy rain, and this made the crossing difficult. In order to cross the river, we collected wood, bamboo poles, and many other materials from the countryside and used them to help us make the crossing. I myself used 2 wooden poles about 6 feet long. I tied these together with straw rope. Then with my chest resting on the connecting straw rope, I swam across the river.
In early September, one attack came close to breaking the UN front. General Walker put a shattering proposal to the South Korean Chief of Staff.
또 우리는 최후의 생각을 하지 않을 수가 없다. 그것은 뭐냐?
If we are unable to hold Pusan, we will have to consider a plan for the evacuation of Korea. We will take 2 divisions of the Korean army and about 100,000 civilian refugees to a US territory.
후송도 해야 되겠고 계획도 짜야 되겠다.
I was stunned by this and immediately reported the conversation to President Rhee, who was visiting the front. President Rhee said, "No, I will not allow even a single Korean to be evacuated from our homeland. It is simply inconceivable for us to leave. General Walker can evacuate all the American soldiers he likes, but the Korean army and people will fight to the last man, to the end."
국민과 국군만은 마지막 일순까지 싸워야 된다.
North Korean propaganda film maintained that morale was high, but the momentum had been halted. The North Korean leader, Kim Il-sung, must have known that time was running out. Southern civilians were enrolled by the North to move supplies over a transport system under constant attack.
Usually it happened at night. And what my mother did was, is when they rush into the house, they count the number of the mattresses. And they say, well, there's 5 mattresses, why there are only 4? One must be hiding somewhere. So my mother did not sleep with mattress because I would use it, and she would sleep on the floor without it. And I would either run or go back to the hall, or they disappear to neighbors. Then they would count, and there were only 4, and there were 4 accountable, you see. This happened.
By mid-September, up to 50,000 North Korean soldiers had died, in addition to the 60,000 guerrillas killed behind the lines. American casualties were 4,000 dead and 15,000 wounded or missing. Neither side could force a military decision, and America could not tolerate continuing high casualties. MacArthur decided to exploit the UN's obvious advantage, total control of air and sea, and choose another battlefield.
MacArthur had gone to Korea within days of our involvement, but he came back with the firm impression that to turn this thing around, it would be necessary to land in the rear of the North Korean army in what is literally called a turning movement, and force the North Korean army to fight on a new front.
At a meeting back in early July, MacArthur had outlined a plan.
MacArthur went to a wall map of Korea and tapped it with his stem of his corncob pipe and said, if I once again had the 1st Marine Division, I would land them here. And he tapped the port of Incheon.
Incheon was the main port on the west coast, only 20 miles from the capital, Seoul. A seaborne landing would quickly recover the nation's capital and cut North Korean supply lines. The Joint Chiefs of Staff were far from convinced of the soundness of MacArthur's plan. General Collins and Admiral Sherman went to see MacArthur in late August to express their strong reservations. MacArthur eloquently persuaded them the landing was a good idea. He asked for the US Marines. Eventually, he was given them. The North Koreans could do little about these plans, but they could do something with their prisoners. It was useful to show that Americans were not invincible.
From that, they filed us out, made us march all the way downtown in Seoul on this propaganda parade. We called it a hate march, with banners about peace-loving North Korean people and all this other stuff. I refused to carry in their signs. Some of the men were so sick that they were carried downtown, and one of them died on the way back. Shortly after this, we started hearing noises that we thought they were playing basketball in the gymnasium. And then it dawned on us it was heavy artillery fire. What it was the artillery bombardment of Incheon prior to the invasion.
From the safety of bases in Japan, the largest armada since D-Day set sail. 269 ships with crushing firepower. How did MacArthur and the United Nations intend to use this power? To conclude the war or begin a new one? A war to unite the whole of Korea under Syngman Rhee. On September the 15th, 1950, American and South Korean Marines landed at Incheon, 150 miles behind UN and North Korean forces locked in battle in the southeastern corner of Korea. Despite the power of the UN Armada, for its commander, General Douglas MacArthur, the landing was a strategic gamble taken against the advice of the military establishment. Korea was a new kind of war against a new enemy, where the goals were vague and the cause unclear. MacArthur was pursuing a military success, but what constituted victory here? The defeat of the communist invaders, or simply the restoration of peace? By late November, with a bitter winter gripping the peninsula, the fighting had dragged a chain of destruction the length of Korea. Across the frozen Yalu